around building high quality transitions to kindergarten. Now that we've looked at all of the stakeholders and entities and the importance of the transition process, we're going to start looking at how to form a high quality transition team and a year-long transition plan. So just a little housekeeping. Again, if you're in a group, please work together and in the chat box. If you can do it, Leanne's ask would be great. The session is being recorded for future use, and please utilize the chat box with any questions. We'll pause when appropriate to answer or address at the end of the session. There's a little bit more information in this session than the last couple, so we're going to try to go through it not quickly, but a little quickly, because we are mindful of the fact that breakout rooms are important and everybody would like more time. So we're going to attempt to do that today, but I make no promises. Next slide, please. So the objectives today are to gain an understanding related to identifying members and tasks of a school or SAU-wide transition team, understand how to develop a community-based school SAU-wide transition plan, and then gain access to sample resources and templates to use in the development of your own plans and teams. So transition plans and teams who build and carry them out, build out the plans and carry them out, provide a level of involvement from children, families, educators, and communities. And research has found that effective strategies not only promote teacher increased self-efficacy, but also decrease stress levels, not only with families and children, but teachers and administrators as well. So building out that plan for seamless transition between an early childhood program or our child that's at home into a public school program makes a significant difference in the child's life and ongoing school and teacher success. The overarching document that we are looking at today is the fifth in the series, rather, the Ready School. And so we're looking at schools that are ready to work with their communities, work with their community providers, work closely with families, look at community assessments and what is needed so that they are ready for the children entering. Because we talked about earlier in session 2 that children it's not always about child readiness. It's also about the community being ready, the family being ready. And of course, it's about the school being ready, because we want to be able to individualize for children and families and meet them where they come in. And a couple of points to ponder to find out if your school is ready. Creating a curriculum, creating connections to facilitate a successful transition to kindergarten requires focused effort and leadership, which we will talk about in building teams. And then it's most effective when strong relationships and valuable partnerships are linking children, families, schools, early childhood programs, and the community. They're established before kindergarten starts, and that's where we come into our year-long transition plan. So we have 2 samples, this slide and the next slide, and it just gives kind of an overview of what a high quality year-long transition plan is. And so there's another one that Liam will put in the chat. It's a little bit different. It has different time frames. This one is done by month or a couple of months at a time, but it just gives you an idea of how to do that year long. So this is the pre-K year. So October of pre-K year is when we're going to start identifying those students and children that are in our catchment area that are coming into our kindergarten, and then communicate important dates and contact information and receive some to the family. It's not necessarily enrollment or scheduling screenings or anything of that sort. It's really just to start that relationship building with the families and with private and family providers in the area as well, because they oftentimes will have a lot of the children coming from those programs. So you want to reach out and work with them, which is actually the next one. But so we're looking at offering family meetings, play groups, working with community providers to align activities into transitioning, and then family activities such as library story hour or family workshops around if they need information about kindergarten, what happens when the children move into kindergarten, how is the school different from pre-K or from their private program or from their home. And then you can see as it moves on through the year how the different activities sort of get families to involved with not only the school and the providers, but also with each other, so they can start building those relationships and bonds as well. And then the next slide is the same. So It's also important to remember that over the summer, we may do an ice cream social or ride the bus or meet the teacher outside or on the playground, that sort of activity for the families. But that transition does not end as soon as the first school day or first school week starts. So it really goes until the middle of the fall. And so what we're looking at here is continuing to check in with families and doing family nights and that sort of thing, just to let families know how the transition's going, find out how the transition is going for their families. Are they getting the information they need? Are they not getting information? How can they be better supported? We're planning our conferences, which I think everybody does in the fall. And then, how kids are settling in, and then outreach will begin to start the process for the pre-K families of this new school year to come in. So they'll go back to the last sample timeline, and that whole cycle starts over again. And so we are going to do a breakout room now. So in the chat, let's see, we have a sample of, there's a sample of a pre-K transition timeline. This one in the chat box does not go through the full year. It actually stops, which is unfortunate. But so I want you thinking about how we're talking about a full year. So it would be fall to fall for those students, and then the next cycle would start that next fall for incoming kindergartners for the next year. Also, Leon's going to put in a sample copy of a transition plan. Throughout this session, we're going to work at just kind of filling in things on the sample plan just to get an idea. And that was sent out to everybody, unfortunately, yesterday. It was a little late, so I apologize. But if you have that printed, or you can pull it up on a screen, that sort of thing, you can take some notes. And so we're going to do a breakout room for about 4 or 5 minutes. And we are going to be looking at the sample timeline of the kindergarten, of the pre-K to kindergarten year and past. I'm talking about what that fall after the children are in kindergarten looks like. And then if you want to review the sample transition plan, just to get familiar with it, that would be great.
I'm just gonna give folks a second to get back in. So as we continue to move through today, we're going to make sure that we explore each step to strong transition planning with greater detail. We want to make sure that we're supporting and building strong transition teams and high quality transition plans for districts, for providers, and more importantly for families. So the 6 steps that we're going to go through are here. Step 1 is to develop a transition team. Step 2 is to assess current transition activities. Step 3 will be to identify specific goals around transitioning. Step 4 will be to build out the transition plan. Step 5 will identify effective data and evidence. And step 6 will be to implement the plan and ongoing evaluation of that plan. So when developing a transition team, we want to look to the leaders, right? Not only the leaders in the school or the school community, but we want to bring in leaders who can help strengthen those relationships, really work toward linking all of those entities together. So the first consideration for step number 1 is to identify the key leaders in your community, including the leaders who have these 4 following sort of criteria pieces. We want to make sure that they have the competence and the ability to direct resources, focus attention, and make important policy decisions. We want to make sure those leaders are motivating for teachers and families, that they're the key in community partnerships and in the school, and can lead from a culturally responsive place, and are knowledgeable in diversity, equity, and inclusion. So, as we sort of work through, review your lists of potential community partners for module 3. If you don't have that handy, just sort of be thinking about it in the back of your mind in terms of who might be part of this team for you. If you do have it handy, then go ahead and take it out and have it ready for the rest of our time today. And if you have it right in front of you at the moment, you can go ahead and circle the leaders or the folks on there who would fall into sort of this leadership role potentially. there might be, as you're thinking of it through this lens, other potential partners in your community too, who you could add to your list, who might not have been there originally, but they could be added now. So once you have your potential team members, then the next step logically is to reach out, right? So begin with an introduction of yourselves. Make sure you know who's in the room, what your role is, who you work for, who your key audience is, whether that's students, families, other teachers, etc. Okay, you can have a short introduction of the project at hand, right? Finish with an invitation to join the important and exciting project. So this initial reach out is likely going to be in a digital format, perhaps in an email or some type of outreach, just stating sort of your intentions, I suppose. From there, you can schedule an information session around the tasks of the transition team. So you'll want to mention building the plan out, facilitating activities, reworking the plan as needed. And this can be a face-to-face meeting. It could be a Zoom or virtual session, certainly whatever meets the needs of those that need to attend. And of course, depending on the group size and everybody's comfort level. You'll want to provide an anticipated expectation of obligations for the team members. So each person might play a different role, be clear on that up front. As well as, of course, a time and a date limit for acceptance of the invitation. So certainly you'll want to know if you're reaching out to somebody and if they're not able to take on this commitment right now, you'll want to know that from them so that we can either reach out to others or stop bugging them about it, I guess. And have a first team meeting once you've got commitment from folks. So possible roles of the transition coordinator. This could be to, well, first let me mention, you may want to have a transition coordinator. This person would work to sort of keep the team on task, right? But also to ensure that the timelines are being met and high quality aspects are being utilized. The coordinator could be the transition team leader, but this certainly doesn't have to be. And he or she should be comfortable being a parent liaison and ensuring that all families have outreach and information. So it's likely that if you choose to have this role on your team, it's likely going to be somebody from the school. It certainly doesn't have to be, but they're going to have knowledge of the project and of the team members the best, I think. So these are a few of the tasks that the transition team could focus on. So your specific community and school may include these things and others, of course. So to identify your community's needs, evaluate current transition practices, assess partnerships and community resources, include educators and providers in the process, develop transition practices and policies, and communicate about roles and planning. The transition team should first make an effort to build a team meeting schedule that occurs at regular intervals and recognize that building the transition plan will happen in steps and over time, right? So meeting at regular intervals allows the team to come together consistently in order to evaluate data and measure goals and consider if the plan's activities are supporting the goals or need to be reconsidered. And those things take time and they take a lot of thought and communication. So it's not meant to be something that's rushed or not given its ample time to be considerate of. So we'll look at potential barriers as well to be mindful of later on today.
So as we move on to step 2, where we're going to assess current transition activities that we're already doing, we want to take a look at what's already working. So this is a quote from a main parent from our survey that we did, I don't know, a while ago. And their thoughts were meetings in person or via Zoom in the spring ahead of school screenings to introduce key school administrators, staff, and teachers, introduce parents to their routines and schedules, and have families meet other families and children who are also transitioning into kindergarten has been great and helpful. CDS and school IEP kindergarten transition meetings were key, very overwhelming because there were apparently 20+ people in this particular one. Ride the bus and classroom meet and greet for the family in late August, right before school started, was great. So this parent has listed a number of different activities that for her and her district and school worked really, really well. These are all activities that could be included in a high quality year-long transition plan. One of the things I want to point out here is the CDS kindergarten transition meeting, the IEP meeting. Those obviously don't happen for every child. They happen for children who are coming to school with a current IEP. And two things about that are important. The first one is working with the parents and the sending program, and this may be the CDS service providers, to ensure that going into that meeting, parents can be advocates for their children. They understand what's happening. They understand what their role is and what their rights are. It can be really overwhelming if parents have done that maybe once when they had the meeting that qualified their child and their initial IEP meeting, but when they're doing the transition meeting, there are, as many of you probably know, a number of school CDS provider staff in one room, all talking about their child, which is great, but it can be incredibly overwhelming. The second thing I want to point out about that is that because those transition meetings only happen with children with current IEPs, it's really important to consider the rest of the children who don't have current IEPs and doing transition meetings with possibly with parents, with their providers, that sort of thing. So we can get to know those children and their specific needs, although not IEP level, they do have needs and different personalities and that sort of thing coming into school. So that's really important to know about every child. So we're looking at assessing current transition activities. And while we look through this slide, I want you to consider each question and then consider your current, think about your current transition activities and process, which we have talked about in modules before. So what is currently happening to support kindergarten transitions in your school and district, and how well is information being shared community-wide with providers, with families? Are those relationships with families, community, and schools intentionally fostered, and how, or what could be better about that? Is communication across settings effective? And across settings would be, again, the community, families, providers. And what needs attention? What are resources in your community, your school, or with your providers that are not being utilized? And moving on to step 3, we're going to look at our SMART goals. So as we build out the goals for our transition plan, we want to make sure that they are SMART goals. We want to make sure that the team is on the same page around answering the questions that are listed here. The team will want to utilize their goals to guide plan implementation and evaluation for continuous improvement. At the bottom of the page, I'll just read through the goals would be specific, they'll be measurable, they'll be achievable, they'll be relevant, and they will be time bound. So what does the timeline look like? Examples of year-long transition goals and measurable outcomes could be one of the goals could be meeting with 100% of your private early childcare and education programs, private programs, Head Starts, family childcares, to talk about children and developmental continuums and all of that good information, assessment information. Could be screening of 100% of incoming students prior to kindergarten starting, having 100% of your early childcare and education providers and kindergarten teachers meet together. Beginning family identification and outreach in the fall could be a goal, and that would be the timeline in the fall. And then it could be beginning family nights with 50% of all families in attendance in the fall. The percentages of the numbers of the people and the families that you want to reach out to, again, they need to be realistic and achievable. And if you're starting in the fall, 50% may be achievable in your school.
Marcy, I think when you're talking about starting in the fall, you mean the fall preceding the year that they're coming in, going to be a kindergartner.
Yes, the pre-K year. As we looked at in the timelines, the fall would be the year before they're in kindergarten, that pre-K year where you're just starting to reach to families and putting your your year-long transition plan in place.
Okay, once you've got steps 1 through 3 pretty well underway, then you can start thinking about step 4, which is to build out the transition plan. So you've started to think about your current practices for transitions that have already been happening. You've started to think about some goals, perhaps. Marcy mentioned that using the SMART goals strategy. And then you'll start to build out that year-long transition plan with activities to support families and children, the providers, and educators. So when it's time to consider that transition plan, you can use these questions to guide your team towards building the plan out. So ask yourselves, what current transition to kindergarten practices support our goals? So what are we already doing? And are they relevant to what we want to see happening? What activities should be added to support the goals? So what are we missing? Are the transition activities equitable for all families? And this is a really important question to ask yourselves, because it's not uncommon for outreach to families to fall flat for one reason or another, right? You put yourself out there looking for a response from families and you don't get the response that you intended from 100% of that outreach. So there's something missing somewhere, right? Somewhere along the way, that's not working. So what other strategies could be put into place that will reach all families and hopefully get some type of a response? What community supports will be needed? What are common barriers for families that might come up? Often those might be language barriers, they might be transportation barriers. You might be hosting something at the school that families can't access because they don't have a vehicle or a ride to get there. So being sort of open-minded and think outside the box around those. And then, have you assigned people to carry out specific roles and activities? So all of these can't fall on the shoulders of one person, right? It's a transition team for a reason. Utilize everybody's strengths in carrying this out. So, oh, did I interrupt you?
Nope.
Okay, sorry, I thought I did. So when building a school or a district-wide transition plan, these are the things that you'll need to consider. So think about securing transportation for families, right? I just mentioned that a moment ago as well. Hold meetings at various times of the day in different areas of the community and offer childcare services for younger siblings. You might consider that some families may need individual outreach due to lack of connectivity, perhaps, interpretation services, and other resources offered within the community to enable them to engage. There's important summer or evening transition activities that might be asking teachers for more time out of their schedules. Be mindful of that. Clear communication with all team members and supporting partners, staff is really important for the plan to be carried out smoothly. So in turn, bringing clarity and ease of the transition to children and families and educators. You want to make sure that getting information out is done in a timely fashion, right? So that parents and caregivers can engage and participate, and recall our community partners and their roles as well. So thinking about who is on your list as potential partners, if they have hours that they need to be committed to their work and their original roles, being mindful of those things. And then home visiting can be a really big task, ones that public schools typically aren't as familiar or as comfortable with. But home visiting is a really great way to meet families, to meet children's caregivers, and the children initially as well, if this is your first introduction to them. Meeting them in their spaces can help parents to engage who may otherwise not be able to, and it helps to put them at ease in their own home when meeting educators and sharing child and family information. There are training and safety measures, right, that should always be put into place around home visits. Our partners at Head Start are throughout the nation, but specifically in Maine, are really great folks to communicate with around home visiting protocols. They've been doing it for a long time. It's not always easy, it's not always comfortable, but it has huge benefits to building that relationship with families.
Okay, so moving on to step 5, we're going to look at identifying data sources. So as the team thinks about measuring outcomes of the transition plan, consideration needs to be given to what to measure and how best to do this. So what information can be collected to meet the goals of the transition plan or to see what goals are being met? And is it already being collected? Does the team need to consider how to collect new information or feedback? Data is used to evaluate transition activities to determine how the plan is working and then future next steps. And that is our ongoing consideration of our transition plan. So some types of useful data that can be used to collect types of useful strategies to collect that data. Think about whether there are pros or cons to each of these. The team can look at these after considering what data is needed to continue to inform the plan and then decide which method is best for collecting information. And some of these may already be happening. You may already be doing informal observation, reporting on what you're currently experiencing, what attendance, looking at attendance records for events, and that can inform you as to whether or not you are reaching those hard to reach families or if you're connecting with all the families that you need to connect with or want to connect with. Staff from receiving and sending programs or family interviews. Perhaps what we talked about, some of the barriers, some of the activities are at a time that's inconvenient for working parents or inconvenient for parents of young children, that sort of, younger siblings. So we can do some interviews and find out what is working and what isn't, and then why, and maybe change those barriers. Again, surveys from staff and sending programs or families also are helpful in collecting that information. And then rating scales for families and staff and providers who do attend can also be very helpful. You may have activities that aren't super popular because they just aren't exciting or they're not interesting to families, and maybe that will inform your plan to maybe change up those activities to something that they might be more likely to attend. So your transition team will be thinking about the most effective way to collect data in your community that will inform the planning in the school.
Okay, step 6, last one. So once the plan is built and it's ready to be implemented, you can follow the timeline that was built out, right? So we showed those examples earlier on, and those will be really useful in, sorry about that. Those will be really useful in carrying out and sort of, mapping out everybody's goals and responsibilities for the year in planning those activities for families. So an effective transition plan will be ongoing and continually implemented, evaluated, and updated, right? It's not set in concrete. It's bound to change year to year, month to month, depending on how things are going. The team will continue, though, to update the goals based on the current needs and data. And they'll be continually improving and adjusting the process to ensure that kindergarten transitions become more and more supportive in the community. Every group of students that comes in year after year, no two are the same, right? So we want to make sure that each year we're revamping the plan and updating it as needed to accommodate for different families, different experiences, and different students. So when building transition plans, it's important to utilize the data collected that Marcy mentioned earlier, and to ensure that the plan is being upheld and continues to incorporate all aspects that the team has determined to be important. So do the timelines and deadlines need to be adjusted? How will each new goal and action be measured? Are assigned roles working? So communicating the plan and the updates to the plan in a timely fashion will ensure that all the partners, all the stakeholders are understanding the process and are on the same page. Demonstrating the reason for changes, descriptions of what's working, and if any aspects need to be addressed or readdressed is also important to communicate to all. And of course, don't forget to include the families, the teachers, the paraeducators, office staff, kitchen staff, cleaning staff, PTO, right? Community organizations, anyone that might be impacted by the plan. People are so much more cooperative when they understand the benefits of their efforts.
Okay, so I'm looking at the clock. It's about 4:08, which is awesome. And so we are going to do, this will be a random breakout room, I think, but you can work in groups if you want to. And so what we're going to look at, we're going to do what we did at the end of last session. So there'll be 3 prompts that are on the screen, and breakout room 1 will correspond to prompt 1, breakout room 2 to prompt 2, and breakout room 3 to prompt 3. Building a transition team and determining team member responsibilities. So that would be the discussion in group 1. Identifying strong data sources and brainstorming methods of feedback and data collection, or what you're already doing, will be the discussion in room 2. And then identifying common barriers to transition plan development and or implementation and how to break down those barriers will be room 3. I think that might be everybody. So I thought we might take a couple of minutes if we have one person from each room, or I guess there were only 2 rooms that were occupied. So if anybody wants to unmute and kind of give us some highlights or bullet points of what the discussions were around, that would be wonderful. Or you can throw it in the chat if you're more comfortable.
We were in breakout room 2. We kind of talked about a lot of things before. We kind of talked about all of them really. And like, some of us didn't really have a team or a plan in effect right now currently. So that's something we'd like to start to build in our schools. But then we talked about, I mean, for me, for SMART goal writing as a special ed teacher, I do that all the time. But it's a little bit different. Now you're really like making a goal of how you're going to do transition activities. And then like, how are you going to collect data that you actually did it? So it might be a checklist or something. And then I just said about feedback, like after you do all these activities, maybe you could provide a survey for parents, and they could provide feedback on what worked well and what didn't work well as far as activities or maybe timing. Because we talked about, it's easier for the K student or pre-K students that are already in the building to have opportunities to meet staff and other students and to make activities where they can do walkthroughs. It's reaching those kids that are not already connected to the building somehow. So just making sure that if you reach out to, like, finding activities to reach out to those parents, and maybe doing an activity in the community and maybe doing it on the weekend because during the week might be too difficult. Yeah, I don't know. That's overall what we talked about.
That was lots of great thinking, Holly.
Definitely.
It made me think too that, you know, we often think about surveying our families to you know, see how what we provided worked for them. But in your planning, another type of surveying that you might consider on the front end when you're thinking about what activities you're going to include in your plan might be to survey some of your families who've had children in kindergarten over the last couple of years, so that you can see what worked well for them and what did they maybe wish had happened that hadn't happened. And that might help and sort of feed forward for you what else you want to make sure you build into your design. And one other thing I just mentioned is, you know, a lot of times, I think Nicole talked about this a bit, you know, the concept of home visiting is one that, you know, may work for some of your families. It may not work in all cases, but another strategy that you can employ sometimes with families who may not be as comfortable coming into the school, but are really comfortable, like might access a community center or even have their kids in a rec program for sports. Sometimes just going to that site and starting to meet them is a place to begin to build a relationship. And then they'll feel better when you ask them to come into your school. And I'm sure you all know families, parents who maybe didn't have the best school experience. And so the idea of coming to school is not warm and friendly for them. As much as we want it to be, they just may feel overwhelmed by that. So meeting them in a location that they feel comfortable about is good.
One more thing we did talk about, which is more like a barrier that I forgot to mention, is like the people in our group obviously are passionate, and everyone here passionate and think this is important, but to build a team, to get people that should be on the team involved and on board with it is a little difficult, especially if you're asking teachers who are already maxed out to have more time. So really, if we could get administrators to like provide some time for this like kindergarten team during the school day to start developing these plans, looking over their data collection of what has been done, what hasn't been done, and maybe reviewing feedback. I think that would be beneficial, and you'd have more people apt to be on board.
I just want to say one thing in response to that, and then I see that it is 4:30, so we'll move on to the next slide. Also, I would consider when you're building that team, it's not necessarily all going to be teachers who are going to need that time. There may be a couple, but also, you know, even asking current parents or former parents to be part of that team. And then of course, community providers, they may want to be part of that team. So it's not, you know, so that everybody's not shouldering the big lift. Everybody, you know, it's a team, we all work together, that sort of thing. So think about being like reaching out and broadening your horizons when you're building that team. Nicole, could you move to the next slide real quick? So just real quick, for more information, we do have a website. Leanne just put the live link into the chat room. There are resources for parents and caregivers, educators and providers. Transition plan templates are located here, and information and tip sheets for sharing with families are located here. Also, the professional development modules that we have used over the past 4 weeks are also located here, along with the facilitator guide and the live videos. I think only module 1 is up right now, but the rest should be up, if not by the end of this week, beginning of next week. So that I just wanted to let everybody know that that is there for you. And then finally, this is the QR code. Again, you can take your smartphone camera and point it to that, and it should take you there, or you can use the live link in the chat room. But if anybody has any other thoughts or questions that they want to unmute and discuss while that's happening, please feel free. And thank you so much for joining us.